Imagine taking your seat in a dark theater, right? The curtain rises and
You're expecting a relatable protagonist, probably.
yeah, exactly, someone walking into a living room or whatever. But instead, you see a flock of like live pigeons flying desperately toward a village that just it no longer exists on any map.
Which is a wild thing to see on stage.
It's crazy. And then a few minutes later, an actor steps forward and just starts aggressively lecturing you about quantum mechanics and global supply chains.
You'd be so confused.
Right? I mean, you might even feel like the playwright is deliberately trying to annoy you.
Oh, totally.
Well, a major theater critic recently felt the exact same way. But what if that confusion isn't a mistake? What if it's actually the entire point?
Yeah, we are diving into a massive intellectual clash today. It's one that really forces us to ask how we judge art or, really any new idea when it flat out refuses to play by the rules we expect.
Welcome to a brand new deep dive. Our mission today centers on this really fiery academic paper from the spring 2026 issue of the Mithra Journal of Literary Studies and Dramatic Theory.
It's a fantastic paper.
It really is. The author is Sabrina E. McLaughlin. She's an associate professor in the Anahid Tashin Chair in Diasporic Performance over at the University of St. Augustine.
All right, and she is delivering an absolutely blistering critique here.
Oh, she doesn't hold back at all. She's critiquing a recent review by a critic named James A. Baldwin, which was published on the Art Act blog. And his review is about this playwright and theatrical philosopher, Fared Novin.
Who is a very complex figure to write about.
Yeah, so our goal for this deep dive is to explore the danger of, using the wrong dictionary to translate a completely new language. We want to see how Novin's plays radically reshape our understanding of memory and trauma and identity.
McLaughlin essentially argues that Baldwin has completely misread Novin's work.
Like top to bottom.
Yeah, I mean, he's evaluating a totally alien theatrical language using these really old traditional standards, and this is important, McLaughlin doesn't just dismiss Baldwin outright from the start.
Right. She actually gives him some credit.
She does. She starts by giving him credit for a very sharp observation about what Novin is fundamentally trying to do on stage.
Right, because Baldwin correctly identifies that Novin has totally inverted the usual theatrical script.
Yeah.
Novin isn't a traditional dramatist who just occasionally dabbles in deep thoughts to sound smart.
No, not at all.
He is a philosopher who is actively using the physical stage-like, the theater itself, as his medium of publication.
And that completely rewrites the contract between the audience and the performance. Baldwin actually notes this. He says, if you walk into a Novin play expecting Aristotelian mimesis,
which means, a coherent main character, clear rising action.
Yeah, and a satisfying emotional catharsis at the end where everything just ties together nicely.
If you expect that, you're going to feel like the play is completely broken.
Exactly. And Baldwin rightly sees that Novin has intentionally stripped all of those comforting narrative structures away.
Which leaves a massive void. But Baldwin highlights Novin's main formal innovation to replace that structure. He calls it the diagnostic image.
And this is the core of Baldwin's praise. He describes this diagnostic image as a single object, or maybe a highly specific physical gesture on stage, that condenses a massive philosophical argument into this really immediate visual form.
Like what kind of objects?
Well, he points to some incredible examples from the plays. There's a solitary unlit candle, or an empty pair of shoes just sitting center stage.
Oh, and the clock where the second hand ticks backward.
Right, exactly.
Okay, let's untack this, because my mind immediately goes to an infographic in a corporate presentation.
That's an interesting way to look at it.
Well, it seems like Baldwin is treating these images like a visual shortcut, like you have this massive, unwieldy data set of complex philosophy, and the playwright just distills it down into a neat little visual summary.
So the audience can just grasp it quickly.
Yeah, so they can say, I get the concept and move on. But if McLaughlin says this is a partial map, what is Baldwin actually missing about these images?
What's fascinating here is that McLaughlin completely rejects that infographic analogy.
She hates it.
She really does. She calls Baldwin's interpretation a partial map because Baldwin assumes there's this hierarchy, right? He thinks the philosophy exists first in the playwright's head.
And then the theater is just the delivery truck dropping it off to the audience.
Precisely. He wants the audience to be neatly spoon-fed the philosophy.
Which Novin refuses to do.
Right. McLaughlin draws on the philosopher Gilles Deleuze here. She points out that for Novin, the idea doesn't exist before the image. The embodiment on stage isn't a secondary representation of a thought. It is an event.
Okay, let's translate that for a second. What does it actually mean for an image to be an event rather than just a symbol?
Well, a symbol points to something else, right?
like a stop sign.
Exactly. A stop sign points to the legal concept of halting your car. You see the sign, you think of the rule, but an event produces the thought in real time.
Oh, I see.
So that unlit candle isn't standing in for a pre-written essay about hopelessness.
It's not a metaphor.
Right. The physical presence of that unlit candle, sitting in a dark room with a live audience, forces a unique, visceral encounter. It actually generates the philosophy in the room at that exact second.
So it's not a picture of a concept. It is the concept happening to you physically.
Exactly. And because these images aren't just neat little summaries, the characters on stage can't just ignore them.
They have to react to them.
Yeah.
And this reaction is exactly where Baldwin completely loses his patience with Novin's writing.
Yeah, he gets very annoyed.
He basically complains that Novin's characters talk way too much about these diagnostic images.
He cites that scene we mentioned earlier from the play called The Tavern of Unfinished Returns.
Right, the pigeons.
The live pigeons released on stage flying toward a replica of a village that doesn't exist anymore. Baldwin actually loves this specific moment.
He praises Novin for trusting silence, right? He loves that the image is just allowed to sit there without anyone talking over it.
But McLaughlin jumps in and absolutely tears that reading apart.
She says the power of that scene has absolutely nothing to do with restraint or silence.
No, the power is in the irresolvable tension.
Think about what is actually happening in that room. You have the physical, undeniable reality of these live birds moving with this frantic purpose.
And then you have the absolutely impossible destination, a place wiped off the map entirely.
You're watching biology collide with erasure. And tying it all together is this very specific Armenian concept called karo.
Karo is such a brilliant concept to bring in here. It translates roughly to a longing, but it's not a past tense nostalgia.
It's not just fondly remembering the good old days.
No, karo is a present tense ache for an ongoing absence. It's an active yearning for something that is currently missing.
So McLaughlin argues the image of the birds doesn't cleanly summarize karo.
Right. It forces the physical reality of the birds and the impossibility of their destination to exist in a state of permanent, agonizing tension.
And Baldwin hates when this tension isn't silent. He complains that in other parts of Novin's work, characters will witness a powerful image and then just endlessly talk about it.
They dissect it, they obsess over it.
He compares it to someone delivering a great punchline to a joke, and then immediately explaining why the joke is funny. He says it ruins the magic.
But McLaughlin completely flips this critique on its head.
She says the explanatory speech isn't a failure of the playwright's confidence at all.
The speech is the philosophical subject of the scene.
It's like, imagine you're sitting next to someone who is frantically talking over a beautiful, haunting piece of instrumental music because the silence is just making them incredibly anxious.
That's a great analogy.
Right. Baldwin is sitting in the audience going, the playwright ruined the music by writing all this dialogue. But McLaughlin is pointing out that the anxiety of the person talking is the entire point of the scene.
Yes. The characters who over-narrate are enacting a very specific human pathology.
Which McLaughlin identifies as specifically diasporic.
Exactly. It is the drive to try to stabilize meaning with language. They are desperately trying to colonize the unbearable ambiguity of the image.
Because leaving it open, leaving that tension unresolved, is just too terrifying.
Baldwin's aesthetic standard demands that eventually, meaning must clarify and resolve.
But for Novin, clarification is the failure.
The whole point is to demonstrate how frantically our brains rush in to domesticate something that is fundamentally undomesticatable.
Wow. And this fundamental misunderstanding of why the characters are speaking leads directly into Baldwin's most troubling critique, I think.
Oh, definitely.
Because he expects characters to act like normal people in a normal play, he completely misjudges the people on stage, especially the women.
Baldwin writes that Novin's female characters are just poorly written.
He claims they aren't fully realized individuals with desires and flaws, but rather they just act as philosophical vehicles.
Like they're just props moving abstract ideas from point A to point B.
But McLaughlin, who is a feminist performance scholar, she drops the hammer here. She calls this demand for psychological interiority critical colonialism.
That's a strong phrase.
It is. She says Western realist theater has deeply trained us to think that a good character must have deep individuated psychology.
You know, a rich backstory, secret motives, a clear emotional arc.
But Novin isn't writing Western realist theater. In his plays, no character, male, female, or non-binary, is psychologically individuated.
They are all embodied philosophical positions.
Right. And she proves this by pointing to a specific scene in the play, The Manuscript of Ismail.
This is where Novin puts multiple simultaneous versions of the central figure, Ismail, on stage at the exact same time.
It's not just a memory play. It literally turns human memory into a physical battlefield.
Picture the staging of this. You don't just have one actor looking wistfully into the distance.
No, you have different actors of totally different ages and genders, all claiming to be Ismail, physically occupying the same space.
They might be speaking overlapping dialogue, physically displacing one another.
Literally fighting for the right to dictate what actually happened in the past.
And crucially, some of those versions of Ismail are female.
Right. And McLaughlin argues these female versions aren't secondary characters or mere vehicles for a male protagonist.
They embody a totally different relationship to social legibility and the intergenerational transmission of trauma.
A female body holding that specific historical memory changes the entire philosophical weight of the scene.
The gender isn't decorative. It is philosophically determined by the specific kind of memory that version of the character has to hold.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because I want to pause and just push back on behalf of anyone listening who loves a good story.
Sure, go ahead.
Isn't it a completely valid critique for a ticket buyer to want characters they can actually emotionally connect with?
It's a natural instinct, yeah.
If everyone on stage is just a walking, talking, philosophical concept battling it out, doesn't that make the play incredibly dry? Aren't we allowed to want to care about the people we're watching?
This raises an important question, and McLaughlin actually concedes ground here.
She does.
Yeah, she doesn't give Novin a blanket pass to write flat, uninteresting characters. She explicitly acknowledges there are moments in his lesser works where women, unfortunately, are used as mere props to facilitate a male character's philosophical crisis.
No, she isn't calling him a flawless feminist icon.
Not at all. But her demand is that we evaluate his characters based on philosophical agency rather than psychological realism.
Meaning we need to ask a totally different set of questions when we watch them.
Exactly. We shouldn't ask, does this character feel like a real person I could get a beer with?
Right. Wrong question.
Instead, we should ask, does this character embody a full, complex, highly contested idea?
If the female figures in his plays are instantiations of genuinely complex, generative ideas that shape the world of the play, then the charge that they are just vehicles fails entirely.
They are active vectors of serious thought.
The reason Novin so aggressively rejects standard psychological realism, the reason he relies on this agonizing, irresolvable tension and puts multiple versions of the same character in a fistfight over memory, it all comes down to a massive blind spot in Baldwin's review.
A huge blind spot. Baldwin completely ignores the lived reality of the diaspora.
Baldwin mentions the psychological trauma of the Iranian and Armenian diasporas in passing, but he just treats it as background flavor.
He treats it like an Instagram filter placed over a normal camera lens to make the play look a little more tragic and exotic.
Yeah, but McLaughlin argues the diaspora is the camera. It is the constitutive epistemological condition of the work.
Let's translate that phrase because it's some heavy academic lifting.
Please do.
Constitutive epistemological condition basically means the diaspora isn't just the subject matter the characters are talking about, it is the operating system running the entire play.
It dictates the physics of the world.
Exactly. How time moves, how reality is processed. The actual physical form of the play matches the psychology of being displaced.
Because diasporic consciousness isn't a straight line. It is the raw, minute-by-minute experience of existing in multiple temporal registers all at once.
You have the violent, traumatic past that forced the migration.
You have the heavily negotiated, often alienating present reality.
And you have this imagined, idealized homeland in a future that can never actually arrive.
So your identity in that state isn't the solid foundation you can build a normal narrative arc on.
It is a continuous, desperate act of narration against the constant pressure of totally dissolving.
So when Novin puts 3 versions of Ismail on stage at once, it's not some cheeky postmodern theatrical gimmick just to confuse the audience.
No, it's the actual lived phenomenology of diasporic self-experience.
It is the literal physical manifestation of a human mind constantly asking, who was I before? Right alongside, who am I right now in this strange country?
And those questions can't be neatly resolved with a traditional hero's journey because the before was violently severed.
That's why the memory battlefield in the manuscript of Ismail is so vital. It's an attempt to take the invisible, internal psychic structure of inherited trauma and make it physically visible and interactive in a three-dimensional room.
It's brilliant.
So what does this all mean? McLaughlin reframes this beautifully. She says that trying to read Fared Novin without centering the framework of the diaspora is like trying to read Samuel Beckett without knowing a single thing about post-war European nihilism.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Sure, you can physically sit through Waiting for Godot and think it's just a bizarre, plotless comedy about two guys who are really bad at keeping appointments.
You can do it, but you are entirely missing the foundation of the house.
Your understanding is completely impoverished.
And if we accept that the diaspora dictates the form of the plays, we really have to look at how this radically disrupts the actual real-time experience of the audience sitting in their seats.
Because Novin doesn't just mess with character. He completely disrupts how time functions in the theater.
Conventional theater is aggressively linear, meaning accumulates slowly, drop by drop.
You meet the characters, they establish a conflict, secrets are slowly revealed, and by the end of the 2 hours, you know more than you did at the beginning.
But Novin's theatrical time is recursive. It circles back on itself.
Which brings us back to the diagnostic image.
Right. That image makes its massive philosophical claim in the very first second. Boom. The unlit candle is there.
The rest of the play isn't building toward a surprise revelation about what the candle means.
No, the rest of the play is a grueling process of teaching the audience how to actually see what was already sitting there in front of them from minute one.
McLaughlin points out that Novin didn't just invent this out of thin air, though. He is synthesizing some heavy-hitting precedents from avant-garde theater.
She specifically mentions Bertolt Brecht's concept of gestus, which is when an actor uses a highly specific physical attitude or gesture to instantly reveal the social and economic relationships of their character rather than relying on dialogue.
She also points to the slow-motion, hypnotic visual landscapes of Robert Wilson, where a single stage picture can last for hours.
And crucially, she brings in the aesthetics of the British theater company Forced Entertainment.
They're famous for endurance performances that actively exhaust the audience to break down their traditional expectations, right?
Exactly. Novin takes all these tools and synthesizes them into his own distinct diasporic language.
And that language can be incredibly jarring when you hear it. McLaughlin points to a moment in the play, The Trench Between Two Fears. There's this celebrated, weird line of dialogue. Structure doesn't taste like rice.
Baldwin actually likes this line.
He does. He writes that it nicely highlights the contrast between abstract political ideology and practical, everyday reality.
But McLaughlin says that reading is way too thin. She calls that line a linguistic event.
Think about what happens in your brain when you hear it.
It is the sudden eruption of a deeply sensory, culturally specific reality, the physical memory of the taste of rice, violently smashing into the cold academic abstraction of the word structure.
It doesn't just describe the gap between universal concepts and particular human lives. It physically enacts that violent gap right in the listener's ear.
This friction leads to Baldwin's ultimate insult, though.
Yeah, he completely dismisses Novin's play, The Event Horizon Symposium. He complains that sitting through it feels more like a graduate seminar than a play.
And he says this because Novin literally integrates complex economic theory and quantum mechanics directly into the character's dialogue.
McLaughlin's counterattack here is brilliant.
She says Baldwin's insult assumes there is a hard, universally agreed-upon boundary between a theater and a seminar room.
And Novin is actively bulldozing that boundary.
The play isn't trying to cleverly disguise a quantum mechanics lecture to make it palatable for a Friday night theater crowd.
The act of thinking together, the sheer, overwhelming intellectual labor required by the actors and the audience sharing a physical space, that is the subject of the play.
The intellectual overwhelm is the point.
Okay, but let's be real for a second. If you paid $80 for a ticket on a date night, sat down in the dark, and were subjected to a dense, intentionally overwhelming lecture on quantum mechanics that made your brain hurt, wouldn't you be a little annoyed?
I mean, sure.
Is McLaughlin just giving Novin a massive academic free pass for writing a boring, pretentious play?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, McLaughlin doesn't actually say the Event Horizon Symposium is a flawless masterpiece.
Okay, that's fair.
She admits a play can be philosophically coherent on paper and still be dramatically unworkable on a stage, but she is calling out the invisible standard Baldwin is using to dismiss it.
Right.
By complaining that the play requires too much intellectual labor, Baldwin is enforcing a very specific, culturally restrictive boundary on what art is allowed to do.
He's grading a math test using an answer key for a history exam.
Exactly. He is relying on an unacknowledged Western norm that theater must always prioritize feeling over thought, that art's primary job is to comfort you or move you to tears rather than challenge you intellectually and make you do the work.
And we do this all the time, well beyond the walls of a theater. We are constantly walking into brand new situations, a challenging new piece of art, a strange new workplace dynamic, or a complicated new relationship. And we march in armed with our old dictionaries.
We bring our hidden rule books.
And when the art or the person refuses to conform to the rules we brought with us, the easiest thing in the world is to just dismiss them. We call them failing or boring or poorly designed.
But Fared Novin's work, and Sabrina McLaughlin's fiery defense of it, proves that sometimes the friction we feel isn't a flaw in the design.
Sometimes that friction is the design.
It's an invitation to stop demanding that the world speak your language and to start learning a new grammar.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. It goes back to that concept of the memory battlefield from the manuscript of Ismail.
Such a powerful image.
McLaughlin notes that Novin uses those fighting, overlapping versions of Ismail to ask a profound question. How much of our own identity is really just a coherent story we frantically keep explaining to ourselves just to cover up the unbearable, messy ambiguities of our past?
That's haunting.
Think about your own internal narrative. What would happen if, just for a moment, you stopped explaining and simply let your own contradictions exist in the same room together?